I just want to thank you for coming back to do this again, because I think I've talked to you a little bit about this, but I think some of these episodes I've done with you have been the most listened to and the most re-listened to, because I think there's a lot going on, particularly the last couple of years, that people are, in need of kind of reminders of to reprocess.
Right. Well, and the mental health, right? It's so important, especially these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So has your practice changed at all over the last 2 years?
I think it has in some ways, and then also not at all, right? I'm noticing people are more activated in general, and I think that is because of the increase in terms of news, upsetting news, right? Yeah. The repetitious nature of it, and that we're all a little amped up, I think, already feeling at the edge, and then there is consistently more.
Yeah.
So it feels like I'm doing a lot in my practice to help regulate people, and teaching more and more skills of how to do this.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on a course right now for more groups of people, so that we can teach more skills that everybody can use in their daily life, because I think it's really necessary.
Yeah.
That we, like you take a shower, you have a few exercises that you do when you feel, okay, I need to clean out a bit here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think at any time, I mean, we're always going through these ups and downs as far as what's going on culturally, what's going on with us personally. And from time to time, I think there's this swirl going on with people where they start to think things are getting worse and worse and worse. But I think we can look back historically and see some pretty bad times in history. And so it's, some of it is identifying like, what is your narrative? And
absolutely right. And that's why the regulating is so important, because otherwise the nervous system is activated and it will look at everything as this is bad, it's getting worse, everything's negative, and it's not really true.
Yeah,
right. So that's why it's really important to consistently regulate, so that you don't lose perspective.
Yeah.
And can also see, okay, so there's also good stuff. Here's where I have some impact, and to balance it out.
Yeah. Do you find during these more challenging time periods that people dig in a little bit more to their mental health work and emotional health work, or is it harder to process during these kinds of times?
I think yes and no. So for some people, right, there is a lot of, we're more stabilizing and regulating, and for some people it brings up stuff and they're saying, so now I need to address this. So I don't think there is a general answer to that, but oftentimes, when things are really up, we also go to our distracting kind of ways, and it's not the time where we want to work on things, right? And for some people, it's like, okay, I had enough. I need to look at this right now. Yeah. So it's both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you and I have been discussing is emotions in all of this, and I, because part of my work, as you know, is dealing with the somato-emotional experience, which is like how this stuff ends up sort of embedding within our bodies, and how we store this information in our nervous systems, and that our nervous systems are our full body. Right. And I think a lot of times people really think about, the brain being the container of everything, right?
Yeah.
But as you know, we and you see it when you're talking to people, the way they sort of gesture and hold on to places, on their bodies. It's because they're feeling things actually in their bodies.
Right.
And, in my work, as you know, I try to get some identification of where in your body you actually feel some of those things.
Right.
So maybe, one of the things I think that could be helpful for a lot of people, and I do this in my practice, but I think we can kind of get to this sort of verbally so that people can understand this a little bit better too, is, what are emotions in the first place? I think that's one of those things that can be very confusing, because we can, think that a mood is an emotion, or, just to, some basic needs are trying to be met, and that's part of your emotional life. But what's the definition of emotions?
Right. So emotions basically means it's a psychological state. Everybody has a subjective experience of it. Mm-hmm. There's a physiological component of it, right? We feel it in our bodies. And then there's also an expression of it, if we were allowed to express it, or a behavior that comes out of it, right? And this is where I think emotions are so powerful, because they point to what's going on inside of us, so our experience, and they tell us what's going on and what we might need.
Yeah.
And then also it gives us the energy to then act on it if there is something to act on, right? Not always is there a need to then act on something, but oftentimes there is, and then we have the energy to do it.
Yeah, so I like that part about the energy. That I've never heard anybody say it from that point, but that is really like
it is. I mean,
it is
just
our source.
think about the last time you were angry, and the amount of energy, again, if you've been allowed to experience it. So, and I think you and I come in oftentimes when people have gotten more stuck.
Yeah.
Right. So the pain in the neck, or all these expressions that we have where things get stuck, and where we can then just start feeling a bit more into them, into the sensation of it, the physiological aspect of it, where we feel something, but also often where we're not.
Yeah.
Right. Because the numbing out is just another response of suppressing it, or not wanting to feel it.
Yeah.
And that's oftentimes also an interesting place to look at, where do you not feel anything? So where you feel something and where you not feel something.
Yes. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Right.
And then there are emotions that you consider to be like primary emotions, and kind of secondary emotions. So explain the difference between those.
Yeah. So, emotions, if you have a real emotion, they're usually quite fast. Like a minute and a half, right? And there's a waveform to it, and it comes up and then it can subside. And so those are more the primary emotions, like fear, sadness, anger, shame, if it's for a moment, right? And they come and they go.
Yeah.
If we're in the flow, so to speak. The secondary emotions are more what we feel about what we feel. So it's basically the meta level. And oftentimes it's, for example, a very common combo is, so I feel angry, for example, but I'm afraid to feel the anger. So I'm shutting that anger down and I'm with the fear. Or the other way around, I actually feel fear and I go into my fight mode, and then the anger comes in to help me get out of the fear.
Yeah.
Right. Or anger and sadness.
Right.
Oftentimes, for myself growing up, oftentimes I didn't feel anger was really safe. So I would go to sadness.
Right.
And I had to really practice allowing the sensations of anger in my body, and actually feel and enjoy the power that it gives me without acting it out. It's just, okay, so something's not okay. I need to speak up here. Right. And depending on your family culture and the bigger culture, depending on what community you grew up in, whether anger, for example, is allowed to be expressed or not.
Yeah.
It's, you're supported in it or not.
Yeah. And it's and in the workplace, and in, even in a lot of different, extracurricular activities that we do, anger is not something that we feel comfortable expressing. And
we don't have good examples either.
Right. And there are been some teachers that I've had in my work who have been really good at actually responding with the anger emotion, and then explaining why this, bothers them, or, why it caused that emotion for them, and even apologizing if it feels like an overreaction in a situation. And that's one of those things. But there are times when we do have to just simply identify the anger, right? There are moments that we can do this and use this and not use this.
Yes. And, we also need to, again, there's a cultural component, there's a racial component. For a lot of folks, expressing anger is not safe.
Yeah.
Right. And growing up in a family where that's not safe also, right? Not just the bigger society, but if it's not safe in your family, you push it away.
Right. Even for women, I mean, for
totally
years and years, I mean, that anger would basically be taken as, I mean, it gets used this way, but that would be, labeled hysteria, and you could actually get put away for it.
Right, exactly. Right. And I think there's also something about similar thing happens with sadness, that's also something. It's like, we don't want that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, whether it goes from you have 3 days of bereavement after someone dies and then you're done with your sadness. Or, these old things, boys don't cry. There's really lots of people in my practice where that belief is very strongly there.
Yeah. And they need space for it. And I think, even the arts have become, I think, arts and music and stuff have become a place where people are able to express some of those things safely.
Right. Well, that's why music and art, I think, is so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you, I know you have a little bit of that in your background. Do you bring that into your practice at all? Or do you talk to people about that, if they have that?
Yeah, so I like to look at how do people express themselves, right? Because emotion really is about expressing.
Yeah.
Let's say you're really sad, and if we then can cry or sob, it is a release.
You're right.
Right. And that's the energy builds up, and then there's also a way how we can express it. And then also, though, the importance of the emotions too is how do we connect, right? It helps us connect with ourselves, but it also helps us connect with others.
Right.
When we see someone who has an emotion, we're drawn in usually.
Right.
It's like, so what, how can I maybe support you or whatever it is, right? Or can I just be with you? There is something that connects us around it. And the same thing then with art. So I try to see, so is someone interested in poetry? So do they want to write about this? Yeah. For example, do they write a poem about it? Or do they want to draw? Do they want to paint something, right? Or what helps you when you're sad? I listen to this particular kind of music. I listen to this song over and over, and then I feel better. Right. So it doesn't always have to be that you do it. It's also appreciating it, but it's connecting with beyond words, basically.
Yeah.
Right. Because the emotions, they're so physical.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's and a lot of people have some of those outlets, or they have something that I can identify. But when you and I started talking about doing this podcast, we started kind of framing it from the point of view of what is the emotion's value.
Yes.
And I think when just kind of looking through some of the stuff you gave me, like when it comes to anger, say, is that there, it has its purpose kind of almost ends up being slightly its opposite in some ways. Like when it comes to anger is not necessarily just this negative emotion that we have. It's about asserting yourself. It's about setting boundaries. It's about, feeling empowered to, to express yourself in that way, which is, it's not, and even just like allowing the communication to happen, which is not the way we would think about anger. Sometimes we would just think just purely negative.
Right. And I don't like the actually positive and negative. I try not to use that because, as you just said, there's a purpose to every emotion. Right. And actually, I like to look at it. We could describe it as pleasant and unpleasant, maybe.
Right.
Right. Or we could look at the more what we call positive, like joy and love and all the, they're big containers for other experiences like gratefulness, for example, right? Or bliss or whatever.
Right.
We call those positive. It's though more because we're met when we're having those experiences. Our needs are met usually, and that's why they feel good. And the other emotions point a bit more to the needs that are not met.
Yeah.
So anger is oftentimes about injustice. Or a boundary has been crossed and I need to reestablish it, and it gives me the energy to do that. Though if I use that, and again, I want to bring it back into relationship because I think they're actually connectors in relationship.
Right.
I remember the first time I was fully able to express my anger in relationship with my partner, and he was present and could receive it. So intimate. The closeness of that, right? You would think anger is, we're separating, and sometimes that is part of the purpose, is to say, I until here and not further. And sometimes, so it's also, if it's really, if someone can be present with you in that experience, it's like super intimate, and it connects and bonds us together.
Yeah. And sometimes there has to be, you have to allow space for that other person
absolutely
to process too. And there can be an intimacy there just in being patient and sort of waiting for, you know, the proper response from that person too.
Right. Well, that's what we hopefully do with kids. Right. That they get emotionally a little bit more intelligent than we've been raised, is to allow them the space to really process and actually hold them in that.
Yeah.
Right. Because it is scary when there is a wave of anger coming up, or a wave of shame, or a wave of sadness. It can feel very overwhelming. And so if you then can be present with the person, you create a bigger space to hold that together and to allow it then to move through, and you're impacted. Of course, that's the purpose of it, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're not affected.
Right. And so with these, you often say that there's kind of a need or want, right? That's not being met, and that is kind of the heart of the emotion a lot of times, right?
Right. I mean, that's at least my experience in working with people. For example, I explored the other day with a woman. She was thinking about having a baby or not, and she had all these feelings, and she didn't know how to approach it. Mm-hmm. And so I said, why don't we look at all the feelings that you're having and just see what they're telling you? So there's a Gestalt technique, so to speak, where you say, so if you give that feeling or that emotion a voice, what does it say? Mm-hmm. So we looked at, for example, so first she was really afraid. Okay, so what are you afraid about? If you feel the fear in your body. So she located the fear in her belly, and then she gave that a voice, and it was clear. It's like, I would be doing this by myself. I'm really scared that I would be overwhelmed and not be able to take care of me and my baby. Right. So, and that pointed to, well, she needs support, right? If she wants to do this, she needs support. And that was really helpful, because then the fear wasn't this amorphous thing, but it was really clear, oh, this is what this is about. And there were some more fears in there, but then she could do something about that. Right. And then we looked at, okay, I'm also feeling ashamed. What's the shame about? Well, I don't have a partner. I'm doing this by myself. So then we could look at what, does that part need anything that feels ashamed? Or is it enough to acknowledge it? But this is where it then gets interesting. The first thing is you acknowledge it and identify what it is. And then you see, is there anything we need to do with it?
Yeah.
Or is it really enough to just, okay, oh, I got it. Okay. Yeah, that's what this is. Okay, I don't need anything around that. Or, yeah, I do need something around that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, it's interesting. It reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if I told you this story or not before, but I took an improv class when I was starting to prepare, thinking about doing this podcast. I think I had already recorded a couple and was like, okay, this is maybe a little beyond my scope, but I thought I'm going to explore and try this. And a friend of mine talked me into doing it with him. And so one of the things that they do everybody knows the yes and kind of part of improv, but there's another part where you have to make a declaration. If you're in a scene with someone, you can kind of be riffing back and forth, but at some point you have to make some kind of declaration, which is like an I think, I need, I feel, I want. And it really made me think about like the nature of, I mean, it's our relationship with ourselves, but it's also our relationship to everyone and everything else. That if we're not saying that thing, we don't really give anybody else anything to play off of. And
totally, exactly.
And it feels very much like what you're talking about.
Totally. I think that's exactly it, right? And there's a want oftentimes, not just a need.
Yeah.
Right. And if you look at babies or little kids, they go with it. Yeah. They reach for it. They don't have words yet, but oftentimes we don't do that anymore, because so often we get literally or figuratively slapped on the wrist for wanting something, right? And this is where the emotions they'll come in. It's just allow it.
Right.
Again,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about acting out or hurting someone. It's, can I feel that?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Or is there a lot of secondary fear?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go back through this. Let's
Right.
maybe kind of track down.
Yeah.
You gave me a kind of a list of
A
things here. So
list. Yeah. Right.
I'm interested in going back to the primary ones, and then
Yes.
maybe sort of understanding what's below those, or what tends to be sort of part of those as far as secondary is
Yes.
concerned. So
Right.
the main, I'll kind of go through them, and just as a list here, and then we'll kind of go through. So disgust, surprise, fear, anger, sadness, joy, compassion, and love,
Yes.
and shame are kind
Mm-hmm.
of what are considered primary. So
Right. Well, again, there's different systems,
okay,
right? So
okay,
some
okay.
people consider 5 of them primary. Some people say it's 8. Some
Okay,
people
okay.
say it's 12. But you could post, there's actually a really interesting, it's called the feelings wheel.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've seen this
So we
before.
could maybe post this,
Okay.
where it's really interesting because you
Yeah,
get
I'll add a
different
link.
nuances to the feelings. So it's, for example, not just angry, but aggravated or
Mm-hmm.
annoyed. Those have different flavors. And it's really
Yeah,
fun
right.
to actually look at this thing and to see what fits right now,
Yeah.
right? And also explore, so how am I sensing this? Because it's all based on the sensation. So if I'm teary, for example, it doesn't tell me yet, just looking at the feeling into the tears doesn't say anything whether I'm angry or sad or afraid or ashamed. I need
Right.
more information, right? And that
Right.
just helps to become more clear what that is. But
Yeah.
I consider the core emotions really fear, anger, sadness, joy, love, and shame.
Okay.
And shame is a bit of a trickier one because oftentimes we experience shame more as a state and
Mm,
not as an emotion. And what I mean by that is that we can get caught up in feeling bad about ourselves for hours or days, right? And that's then more of a state. That's not an emotion. An emotion is really more a quick hit of something. So
yeah.
when I feel ashamed, for example, it helps me look at, ooh, what did I just do?
Yeah.
Then I need to reflect on it. I might feel a lot of heat, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
can I observe that coming up? A lot of heat. What did I just do? And then you review it, and then you can see, okay, oh, that wasn't cool. So do I need to do something about this? Yeah, I need to apologize.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Right. So that's an emotion. But if I feel bad about myself now for days about this,
Yeah.
then we're in a state, and staying in these states is really not helpful.
And shame can be one of those states that sort of,
Shame can be one of those
it
states. Yeah,
starts in childhood, and you don't realize that it's
exactly.
sort of related to a lot of different kinds of things.
Exactly. Right. And then it becomes more of a, almost like a filter through that you experience everything.
Right.
And
Right.
that's not an emotion, right? But there's specific ways of how to work with that to make that again more into an emotional experience with the, so that the energy can get moving again and you don't get stuck in it,
Right.
right?
And
Yeah,
so
but that's not an emotion. Yeah.
and guilt could be another one of those, or
Guilt is more,
jealousy,
yeah,
or
right. Those, I mean, some people say it is a primary emotion, and we can go both ways. I find it more interesting to look at what is actually in the guilt, for example.
mm-hmm.
And so in guilt, for me, there's oftentimes when I look at my own experience of guilt, I'm angry about something. There
Yeah.
is sadness in there, and there's oftentimes fear in there. And if I can
Yeah.
then see, okay, I'm afraid. Afraid of what? It gives me again a direction of what I need to do. And oftentimes guilt is about, I'm not clear about responsibility. I'm
Mm,
not clear on whose responsibility this is right now, right? So if I'm, let's say, feeling guilty because I haven't visited my parents, it's a popular one with the younger adults. I
yeah.
feel guilty. I haven't called my parents in a while,
You're right.
right? And so then we'll look at what is in the guilt. You oftentimes there's a part that's almost angry at them because they feel like they have to. And then we can explore, is that really true that you have to call your parents?
Mm-hmm.
Where is that part coming from? When did you feel like taken on that responsibility. What is your responsibility, right? So the guilt is interesting because it's more complex. There's, the way I see it, several emotions in there. But if we can then tease those apart, again, it gives us a way forward in terms of, all right, what do I need to do about this?
Yeah. And it's interesting. It feels a lot like, though, like this idea of a state. Like, I think certain things are much more passing, like fear, joy. They kind of hit us and pass a lot of times.
That's
and they may be underlying, but I think people can, like, as you were saying, like, they become the glasses you see through if you have this guilt about, whatever decisions you make, or, again, it probably came from some stuff that happened when you were younger, but, and the same with shame, but then understanding, that those specifics of what it is about right now, as you like to do.
Exactly.
And instead of saying like, well, it's because, and it's easy to blame like a parent or,
of course,
a person in high school who, did something to you or whatever. But a lot of times it's actually much more like just happening right now, so that you can separate that shame from, the underlying state.
Right. And I mean, that's an interesting example, right? Because you can then look at the blame as anger, as a secondary emotion, because right now I'm feeling shame. So I'd rather blame someone else so that I don't need to feel that.
Right.
Right. And so, and oftentimes too is like you said, there's just a blip, and then we're so used to, right, not expressing it or not feeling into it or getting distracted, and it's really about, can I feel that it will pass? Can I just feel that? And I love the distinction you just made. That was a really great way of saying it. Yeah.
Where does melancholy fit into things? I've been thinking, I heard a conversation about it not too long ago on NPR, and then I had already been kind of thinking about it as something that I feel like I've been kind of leaning into it lately again and sometimes it's like the music choice that I kind of, and it's almost like it's more of a mood. It feels like that I kind of want to be in. I know melancholia means like, that you're, feeling kind of horrible for long periods of time, like there's a deep sadness and gloom, but I sometimes thought of melancholy as being like a place that I would like to visit once in a while. Like there's certain movies that kind of make me feel that place for a period of time. And it's almost like it's like a neutral place of processing a little bit. It feels like I can sit with something that might be a sadness, but I almost kind of like being in it a little bit, and I think when I was younger, that was a place I liked to go a lot. And then I feel like I haven't done that much at all with the busy state of my life. But maybe I've just had some more time for it lately, but I kind of forgot about that feeling a little bit.
Yeah. And as you're describing it, I can sense it. I think I was in there for quite some time, 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
Beginning 20s, right?
College,
and I do think, but I do think it is that time where we start reflecting more, right? The purpose of adolescence is really establishing our own value system and what's important. And sadness, oftentimes, it tells us what's important to me. And the melancholy, I think, just gives us maybe a place to explore that sadness and maybe get in touch with the tenderness of it. And also, though, sadness, the purpose is to let go. Right. And so there's a little bit of, okay, I'll hang out there for a while. And it's like, okay, so maybe it's time to let that go. Right. And this is how we grow. This is how we deepen when we're really in touch with grief. And we have so much to grieve about on a daily basis, actually, that we're oftentimes not in touch with. One of my teachers used to say actually 80% of life is actually loss, right? Or grief. That constantly, right? The kids are getting older and this phase is gone, there's a loss. We're losing abilities, there's a loss. We move, there's a loss. So loss is really a big part of life. And I think that melancholia maybe helps us acknowledge that. And gives us the space to process what we need to process, and then move on from it.
And I was even kind of wondering if there are times, as we get older, if that's a harder place to be, because that sadness might scare you, or that loss, all those losses might start to, rather than doing the gratitude work with it, which is like, look at the fabric of everything that's been my life. It's pretty amazing, even if there's been some hard things.
Right. Well, and without the loss, we also don't appreciate what we do have, right? We need both. There's a sadness, but oftentimes there is also a tenderness and an appreciation for life that comes with it. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche calls it the tender heart of sadness, right? That we're really aware. There's oftentimes we're in a place of a tender, slight sadness of, right? And the next breath, and we're letting go, and that moment, and then the next one. It's an acceptance in it, I think, that comes hopefully when we're older. I think that's part of the purpose, is to help us find that acceptance.
Yeah, and maybe this is one of those things that we I think from an educational point of view. I mean, I had this sort of sense recently. I talked to you about it, that my son is first year of college, first girlfriend, a lot of things starting to go on, and thinking, let's find a support person now while things are good. After coming out of the high school pandemic year, and all of a sudden everything opening back up again, it's very exciting for a while, but I can almost just sense, partly because of my work, that there's going to be a turn, and not that it needs to be anything terrible, but just to have more resource there. And luckily he talks to me a lot about things, but even so, like I just want to be dad, and I want somebody with a better skill set, someone like you who's able to do that. So we were able to find someone for him, that through a therapist friend of mine. But I think even now that I've gone through this experience with him, as him being my first child, I'm starting to think about it with my daughter too, that maybe from an earlier age, there's never enough good supportive adults to have in your child's life. And I just feel like this learning, and my son even did something with the group when he was younger, because he was having some emotional stuff going on, and a lot of what they were doing was actually identifying these emotions. And he would even say, I noticed after he was meeting with this group for a couple of weeks, he would say things like, "Dad, it really frustrates me when you say," but I was like, thank you, because now I know. But that's a tool that all of a sudden he had to use, and so in this, this list of things that we're talking about, I'm like, even some of these, I'm not even sure that I even have thought that much about what that actual emotion is.
Right. And then, so what the actual emotion is, and then what does it tell us?
Yes.
And if we can communicate that, so much is actually nonverbal communication. It's not so much what we say, but how we say it, that we respond to, right? And if I can use that and make that explicit, I can basically step into the connection, and then we can be touched, so to speak, right? We can touch each other. The emotions is what touches us. And then when I can see you're having a really hard time, then my heart opens, and I want to step in and support you, right? So there is a lot of, if we can use the emotions as becoming closer, getting to know ourselves and each other, it becomes the glue, and at the same time
really
the
does.
color too, right? It makes things alive. That's why we like events, because it makes us feel alive, right? Whether that's weddings, it's we feel something. Right. And a lot of people, what I'm noticing too is that we say, I feel when you say this, then it's like, that's not a feeling. Right. That there's really something that we've forgotten a little bit, how to actually really feel. It's like, well, that's not quite a feeling. You're making a statement, but it's not a feeling. What are you actually feeling? And then I just name the basic stuff. Oh, yeah. So I'm actually feeling annoyed right now. Right. Good. So notice how you know that, right? Because your body tells you I'm annoyed. Okay, what does that feel like? Right. And then you can contact that, or a lot of the time it's with frustration or resentment is also anger, but it's not expressed. If I can notice that I'm resentful right now, right, because I feel it in my body, it's like, what is that about? Oh, and then I can express it and I can do something about that.
Yeah.
Then it's no longer resentment. Then it's actually anger that is expressed in relationship. And it's like, okay, and then it can move. Then it can dissipate, right? It's like, all right, don't need to hold on to that anymore.
So what's your process for you when you can tell there's kind of I don't want to use the word repressed, but when there's kind of a stagnant, emotional state where someone is harboring something and they can't quite get to find a means to express it.
Right. Well, and the thing is, oftentimes, as like I said earlier, right, it's we might not feel it. We might just feel a little something. So it's easier if there is already some activity. Yeah. Because we're always drawn to activity. Something's going on. We're more interested than if nothing's going on. Yeah. So it's basically going to the smallest unit, which is sensation, and to say, okay, what are you sensing? And can we just give space and let whatever it is, right, arise, and you feel it. Right, so it's learning to sense, actually, really sensing into it. Yeah. Because the feeling is already more. It's already the sum of the sensations, and so to go to the sensations is also helpful because it helps you tolerate that. Oftentimes, right, we don't feel it because it was so scary. Yeah. Because the rage comes up and I don't know what to do with it. Or the rage, I saw the rage between my parents and I need to shut this down because this is way too dangerous. Yeah. Right. And so if you then just look at or just feel into the sensations, it helps you tolerate it. Yeah. And then over time, with the help, for example, of some sensation words. So do I feel tension, for example, in my arms? Yes, I really want to, I can feel the anger. I'm inhaling. Right? I'm feeling like punching something, right? And I can feel the tension in my belly and I'm fiery and hot. And so then you put them together and it's like, yeah, so you're really angry right now. Yeah. Okay. Right. And can we actually, so that's the other part that sometimes people have a hard time with in the beginning, but there's something that is enjoyable. When we're actually fully feeling what we're feeling, it's enjoyable because it's almost like tasting something. It's like, I can feel something. I feel alive. Yeah. Right. And it's like, okay, great. Yeah. Right. It's not bad. But that, so over time, then to expand the ability to feel and sense things. Yeah. And then identify it.
And that energy that needs to move, as you were talking about earlier, like our emotions are our, the sort of seat of energy for a lot of things, and they motivate us, and fear motivates us. Yes,
totally. We need it.
Things that we try to avoid, and anxiety and those kinds of things. But there's an energy. We went through this yesterday with my son took his driving test, and like there's a lot of energy going on there, and then there's a part of it that's like, this is good, this makes us really alert.
It makes us alert, exactly.
And then how can we identify and let some of that move through so that we're not harboring all that intense energy,
Yes, right. And that's the thing. Usually, if let's say the fear kicks in, it's essential, right? It helps us survive. The fear is about then locating, is there something dangerous? And if there is something dangerous, then I have the energy to either fight or run away. Yeah. However, if there's not, oftentimes then, right, we need to then allow the fear to subside again. Yeah. So, no, nothing going on. I'm okay. You look around, no danger. Great. Yeah. Right. But it gets us more alert, and that's important. Then we check things out, and then we see, do we need it or not?
Right.
Right. But there's oftentimes, again, a lack of support, that when we're not supported as children, we become more fearful. Again, fear itself is really a necessary emotion. It's not bad. And again, it provides us, there's oftentimes also a little bit of excitement. It gives us also courage then to do something.
Yeah.
So it's more, can we play with it? Can we be in touch with it and then see what needs to happen here?
Yeah.
Right? It's like riding that edge a bit.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. And is there anything that you do then, like, as going back to exercises, is there kind of a like, because you know my work pretty well at this point.
Yes.
So there's an aspect. One of my teachers used to use this term. This is serious play.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and there's something about that has always grabbed me, in that what it does is it's like, we're here to do work.
Yeah,
but let's also allow for just about anything and our imagination and anything that surfaces. Like, let's not make this necessarily just all about us, that this is sort of like, you know, we become casual observers to ourselves in a way, and then we can laugh about things. I mean, I've been in the middle of sessions for myself where I realize how ridiculous I am with something, and I just can't help but laugh. I mean, it could be in tears before that, and then all of a sudden just go into fits of laughter because you see the dichotomy.
Yes, and actually, when we're starting to become fluid with the emotions, you'll see how quickly they change. I've done a workshop or several workshops when I was younger, in my 20s, with an amazing teacher, and she would help us get in touch through music and singing with emotions. And we had this one time where we were in a circle, and she would just say the emotions, and all of us would feel it and express it, and we would go through them like this, right? And so part of it is to be playful with that.
Yeah.
And playful meaning, let's explore. It's not that serious.
Yeah.
Right? But we need to explore too, what beliefs do we have? So a big part of the exploration is, if you want to start doing that on your own. So first is sensing into your body and becoming aware and identifying, and then just asking yourself, what do you have to tell me? So that's one way. The other way is to say, so what emotions were allowed in my family? Which ones weren't?
Yeah.
Which ones were complicated, felt dangerous, right? And sometimes that's even joy. So a lot of families where there's not a lot of joy, and where it's really difficult then to experience joy. It feels foreign, it feels wrong, it feels dangerous. So we need to really look at which of the emotions weren't safe, because those are then a little bit more difficult to be able to access.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's a good exploration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I there's something different about that playfulness than I think therapy has shifted a little bit. And I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years. You've been around for about the same amount of time, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen some shifts going on, but I would say there's I don't know, we're it's getting cleaner, the process, compared to what I used to see, which was like, people used to just expect a lot of drama, and even the therapists, I think, would really push into the drama, the dramatic emotions, and get people to
catharsis
scream
and big release. Yeah.
Right. Whereas now I think, like, not that there's anything wrong with that. I think we can still do that, and we can work with that, but you can't do that. If you're going to have a therapist, on and off for your entire life, that you can't, that doesn't sustain. You have to start, like, breaking this down into, like, something that's usable. So is that something that you've seen as well?
I use this all the time, right? And I do think I distinguish a little bit. Excuse me. So Gestalt therapy was very cathartic in the beginning, right? And there's still a place for that, I think. If someone has held in their anger all their life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
We want to help the person express that, but in a safe way, in a contactful way. And oftentimes that's much easier to do in a group.
Yeah.
Because the group can hold that.
Yeah.
There's contact, right? It's a little different one-on-one. There's a place for that. But I also think there's a place for working with yourself, working with each other in a way that feels safe. Excuse me. Something in my throat. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
It's both needed, I think.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's kind of, and even with somebody, like if I'm working with somebody new, I'm kind of trying to get a sense of like what their therapeutic process is, and
Yes.
also what the kinds of work that they've
Right.
done is, because I see some people who sometimes have been led a little bit too much by a therapist,
Yes, right.
maybe, and they're not working with them anymore, so maybe they did hit an endpoint with that person, but I think they're expecting something really dramatic with me then. And I think they're
Right.
always a little, surprised. And not that I don't have dramatic things happen on my table sometimes, but
Yeah, right. And sometimes it happens, but I think, we're not eating a meal like this. I mean, once in a while we do, right? But otherwise we're taking
that's
bites
that's
because then
that's
we
a
can
great way to talk
digest it.
about it.
Because then we can digest it. If we open up too much and we don't have the ability to process it, it's not helpful.
You're right.
Right. And that's why it's so important. Sometimes a group can increase that capacity,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very often that people come from from a workshop where they have these big catharsis, and that's great.
Yeah. And it happens
And
in groups,
then
right?
it happens in groups often, or they
Yeah.
go on a shamanic journey, whatever they do.
Yeah.
And though it needs to be also integrated, and that's a little bit more like, I need to chew. Do I want to swallow this or not?
Right.
Okay, I
Right.
swallow it, and then I digest it, and then I integrate it, and then I'm ready for the next thing.
Yeah.
So slowing down is really important, and take smaller bites is totally fine. Again, it's both.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think, that the why I'm emphasizing emotions too is we're so often caught in our narrative.
Yeah.
How we think about things, what we believe. Our mind is so good at hooking us with the thoughts. The emotions for me feel so much more accessible, and they really do help us move forward, where the mind oftentimes gets in the way.
Yeah.
The emotions help us.
And this is why I get a little frustrated when I hear someone has been,
Yeah.
when someone's been working with a spiritual guide or a therapist or whoever who has projected something, when
Right.
I'm not, I know I don't want to say that people aren't, that there aren't intuitive people out there who might be able to read a lot into someone, but I just don't think a lot of growth can happen when someone tells you your truth. And
exactly. I'm more interested in helping people feel more empowered, because they can actually relate to themselves and know what's going on versus needing someone to tell them. Right. Yeah. Sometimes that ability is actually, people need someone to develop that ability.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you didn't get that in childhood, you can't have a connection with yourself if you haven't had someone connecting with you.
Yeah.
And then there though is a time to say, so these are my emotions. I'm responsible for my experience in my body. What's going on? And so what we really need is curiosity.
You're right.
Right? And mindfulness to explore that and then make sense of it.
Yeah. A lot of times, as I was prepping for this and looking at your list, I was just thinking, like, meditation in some ways, you're just allowing yourself to, like, a lot of these emotions are going to kind of move through in different waves as you're even just meditating, or as you're doing whatever exercises are meditative to you. And that the teaching that goes on in some ways is just right there in the emotions.
Yes, exactly. Right. And so paying attention is basically what helps. Right. If I look at let's say the news or something, and I want to see what is my response right now. And these days it's usually anger. So I can just see it. Right. And so can I just notice that? Or it's sadness. Can I be with that? Because we're impacted all the time. And if we don't take time to notice how, we can't digest it.
Yeah.
Because emotions really help us also then to digest what's going on here.
Yeah.
Right.
And then maybe even be able to identify what the purpose of that emotion is going to be for you. Like if anger about, racial inequity is
Yes.
something you see popping up a lot, then maybe that means that there's a purpose there for you, that there's an energy there, and maybe that's what we should be focusing on.
Exactly, right? Because again, it's subjective, and it always depends on our experience growing up, our values, what we're interested in, what is, for example, the injustice that we're passionate about. And then go with that, use that energy.
Yeah. That's really helpful. I mean, for me, that's what I think just when I look back over the course of my journey, trying to work through some of my emotions, I don't think I was ever given it that succinctly.
Yeah. Right. And again, this for me, it helped me so much, and I wanted to have something that people can just take a look at and say, I'm angry. What's that about right now? Or I'm feeling joy. Oh yeah, that helps me connect with people.
Yeah.
Right. And that helps actually create more energy so we can build something together.
Yeah.
So that's the purpose of joy, right? Or the purpose of love. We haven't talked much about that, but there's something about, again, the connection with other people, but also that it gives us so much energy then to create and build something beautiful together, whether that's art or a new company or a new project in the world or a family, right? Or a garden or whatever it is. But that is what carries us. And that's why it's so important to be in touch with it. It's also more fun. It's more fun. It's more fun to feel.
Yeah. And kind of going back to what you were saying before, like these emotions are the glue to these kinds of things. And even to my what I learned from my improv class, like I by declaring something, what I want or what I need or what I feel to somebody else, I'm offering a return.
Exactly, right? Because otherwise you don't have relationship.
Yeah.
Relationship is something I'm doing, saying, feeling impacts you. And then you share with me what happens for you.
Yeah.
And it's like playing a ball game. It goes back and forth. And as soon as one of us drops it, it's done, right? So then it's like, okay, let's pick it up again and start again. But that's what creates actually connection.
And it seems like therapy, like talk therapy work. I mean, even my work, even though I'm not really a talk therapist, but there's a lot of dialoguing that goes on in my work where I'm, I'm just trying to help identify certain kinds of things that people are feeling in their body. But that, that exchange, of what we're trying to do, is something that we're practicing basically, right?
Yes, it's a practice. Yeah.
And so because the practice is really for having these more dynamic relationships with other people. And, a lot of times we just, maybe because of what our family dynamic was when we were younger, or, some things that were, hurts in our earlier life that we're, still struggling to get past. Once we kind of are able to work on this and identify and understand how that, works in ourselves, and even be able to get past some of the judgment that we developed because of that, now we can actually do this sharing.
Right. Because the judgment really is, again, a secondary thing, right? It's like a defense that we've taken in from our parents, for example, to not do something or feel something. And I do think it's a practice. The practice is really noticing. So the noticing where you feel something, and then also, again, the noticing and to become curious. I'm watching the news right now and I don't have a reaction. What is that about?
Yeah.
Right? I know intellectually this is bad. I'm not feeling anything. What's going on there? Wow, I feel really numb. Okay, where do I feel numb? Can I be with the numbness? And the attention is almost like sun. The sun is melting. Whatever stuckness or frozen response there is. So paying attention to is in itself enough, because it will melt it. It will reveal what's actually going on, and then things can become again a little bit more fluid.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it is dramatic, and sometimes it's just very, organic and very, nothing special.
Right.
Can be very playful too.
Yeah. And just giving yourself the freedom. And I talk about this a lot. I've talked about it on the podcast a few times too, but just giving yourself sometimes the space to allow that to happen.
Yes,
It's sort of like most people are sort of have an experience with having a really stressful time period and then going on vacation and getting sick.
Yes.
Well, part of that is you've just given your body an opportunity to process, and some of it is, emotional based. Some of it is, the somatic, aspect of the emotional states and the stress, the chemical part of it too. But I think that's one thing that we if we're better at. I mean, a therapeutic session is that, but we obviously we can't pay for this every single day. So,
and we don't need to, right? I mean, hopefully we do this for each other as friends, as partners, as siblings.
Yeah, that's a good reminder too.
Right? We can do that. The thing is, we don't need to do anything with it. We just need to welcome whatever it is, and just say, yeah, this is okay. It actually can help increase the tolerance again, because sometimes it's scary to do it by yourself.
Yeah.
But if there is someone that you can hold on to, maybe hold their hand and just say, can you sit with me while I check in and see what's going on here?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, I think we have so many therapists. We don't have a lot of communities anymore, and groups of people and larger families and larger groups of people who do this for each other. And I think we can definitely, it's important to go back to that.
Yeah, and that might be one of the changes that's gone on the last couple of years, right? Is that
right.
Being isolated in the emotions.
Yes, right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. We need to be received.
We do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Karin. This has been great.
So great. It's always so good to talk to you, Jeremy. Yeah. I'm also coming out of this with more ideas of how to use this. So this is very exciting.
Are you doing any writing right now, or anything? I know you're starting to teach some groups and you're doing some couples work too.
I'm not the biggest writer, I have to say. I'm not it's my second language, and writing is not. I'm more doing, I think.
Yeah.
So either not doing anything, or then just how can I use it? How can this serve people? But maybe eventually I'll write something up.
Did you train in German at all, or just in English?
I did do my social work degree in Germany, and I had my practicum, an internship in German. But then I did something different for a while, and then I studied here. So that's where I really got into it. But I did my own therapy, 2 different kinds actually in Germany.
Okay.
So there is I have the German.
So you process a little bit in both.
I do. And sometimes, what's interesting about that there's sometimes words, particularly feeling words, that are better in German.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I could
right.
see that.
That's probably because, it feels like there's a more variety of words, or because I grew up with the word, it resonates more. It's probably a little bit of both. And then I think there's some words in English that feel much more poignant and helpful to use. So it's fascinating to me in terms of the language part as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's one thing I try to remind people of too, is that sometimes, when we're going through some certain emotions too, it's not always important to identify the word, because words can be really hard to identify things. Right. And sometimes you'll just have an image, or even a color. I mean, I find a lot of people will just identify textures of things, right? Or like you were saying, hot or cold, or those kinds of things. And
we don't always have to identify it either. Yeah, you can just feel it, right? It doesn't have to always be then this big exploration, and now I need to do something with that. It's more the noticing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've noticed for myself, for example, with shame, which was a big thing for me, it would take days sometimes to get out of a shame spiral. Mm-hmm. If you start really noticing the sensation of it and not go into the storyline about it, and not replay the situation over and over again, that then triggers the shame again. You're getting out of it within a few minutes.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, just sense it. Your body knows how to do this.
Yeah.
And allow that, and you feel more in the flow of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
more
I think,
exciting.
And I think breath work sometimes, you know, in those moments, it helps.
Right.
It helps you to not get too caught up in the narrative. Sometimes if you're just focusing, and for anybody who's listening, I did one of these 2-minute episodes a few weeks back about kind of resetting your breath, because that breath is really informing your nervous system too.
Absolutely.
And vice versa. So, you know, if you can sometimes just take that, you know, create that space, as I was talking about earlier, to just do that, to do that breath, that kind of lengthening breath within your system, it actually moves the, you know, the energy of those emotions too. And a lot of times
and they and they do have also their own pattern, right? So fear is oftentimes
right.
Yeah. Or anger is like we're fuming, right? So there is that own pattern. And so again, to notice it, then you can lengthen it a little bit and just see, okay, what's going on right now, right? Yeah. And then practice becoming aware and witnessing what's going on.
And I think I mean, in my practice anyways, as I go through these kinds of things, and I've been through some pretty rough periods in my life where I feel like I have to just let myself go through the emotion. Yeah. As I was saying, like that sort of melancholy thing that I just reconnected with, realizing that like it actually feels good to just kind of have it go through with whatever the sense is, whether it's warmth or, you know.
Right. Exactly. That's the enjoyable part. Yeah.
It is. Right.
It is. Yeah. Even if it doesn't feel so good at times, there's something really good about it.
And something joyful is often on the other side of it too, because you were able to sort of, you know, there's an empowerment piece of getting through what we would consider a challenge like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, we could go on for hours.
I know. I was just thinking that too. Yeah. Cool.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate you and taking the time to do this for everyone.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's so beautiful what you're doing in the world, you know, individually and then for the bigger group of people.
Doing what I can.
Thank you. Yeah, great.
All right, thanks, Karin.
You're welcome.
Great to see you.
Great to see you.